Baylor players drafted. Kendall Brown drafted at 48, eventually traded to Indiana. And early on, we thought he'd be a lottery pick, and he went even earlier at number 9 to San Antonio, Jeremy Sochan. Michael Jimenez, San Antonio sports star radio, joins us on Sic'Em 365 Radio and 365 Sports. Michael, we know quite a bit about Jeremy, his story, but what has been the reaction in San Antonio to the selection?
Well, the reaction's been pretty mixed, going to be honest with you. I'd say about half the people love the pick, and about half of them are a little bit confused by it all. Not because Sochan's a bad player, but because there were so many good players still available at the time at number 9. I'm part of the camp that likes the pick, okay? But like I said, yes, 100 people here, 50 will like it, 50 will hate it.
Is part of it because he's not a scorer? Is that what they wanted? What would you say the fans wanted? Because he's not a scorer yet, not to say he won't be, but he, to me, seems to be a pretty Spursy Spur.
Well, that's it. You use the phrase Spursy, right? So what does that mean? The Spurs won 5 titles, in about a 20-year span there, 15-year span, and it was all predicated on defense. And, it was Tim, Tony, Manu. It was all about defense. Bruce Bowen, all of those guys who could lock you down defensively. The game has changed over the years. Over the last 5 to 8 years, it's changed tremendously to it's more of an offensive-oriented type of game. So I found it kind of interesting that the Spurs are going back to the Spursy ways of getting somebody who's defensive-oriented. I've seen the comps or heard the comps say that he's a Draymond Green type of player. We had to kind of introduce the people to Spurs fans saying, hey, that's the type of player that we got here. It's more about defense than offense. But I will remind people, Kawhi Leonard had no offensive game before he arrived in San Antonio. None. He was a defensive wizard, came to the Spurs, developed an offensive game, and became a superstar because of it.
Michael, Jeremy's got a big personality, just a very likable, positive guy. Has that already kind of rubbed off a little bit on Spurs fans? Maybe even some of those who were hesitant to say, like, hey, this is a pretty fun guy, it seems like. He'll fit in well.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting with the colored hair. He has the, the green, the gold, the blue, and all of that. That's kind of interesting because, the city of San Antonio is typically pretty conservative, I guess you could say, for the most part. But it's nice to see someone with a personality that's there. And we had no idea what to expect when we first heard him and do interviews yesterday, and we hear the accent. And it's like, oh, my God, this guy's from Poland, right? So he's from someplace else, and that's a good thing for Spurs. You call it a Spursy pick. Keep in mind, Tim Duncan, Virgin Islands, Manu Ginobili, Argentina and Italy. Tony Parker was from Belgium and France. The Spurs have a history of developing players that are not from the United States. So when I saw that, I thought to myself, you're right, this is a Spursy way. But I'm thinking about it this way. The Spurs need to have an identity of some sort. And if it's not going to be on the offensive end, may as well be on the defensive end. DeJounte Murray led the league in steals this past season. He one time made one of those all-defensive teams. The Spurs have Devin Vassell, who they got from Florida State a couple of years ago. Fantastic defensive player. Now you add Sochan to the mix. Maybe that's the identity of the team.
How much does what they are in transition help someone like Jeremy Sochan, because the expectations don't have to be like he's the missing piece?
Right. Keep in mind, the Spurs' way for many, many years was to rely on older players and all these vets who've been around for 10, 12 years. That's not the case anymore, man. The Spurs last won the title in 2014, have had 3 years in a row with losing records. But Sochan is one of 4 players now on this team who's 19 years old. Got a couple of 22-year-olds, a 23-year-old. The oldest player on the Spurs roster right now is 30. So this is probably one of, if not the youngest roster in the NBA right now. And I think he's going to fit right in because everyone's just like him. Everyone's in that age bracket there. So it's going to be a good thing. And because he's not the missing piece, he can kind of find his way and try to become a star within this organization. He's one of 3 guys the Spurs got in the first round, and I think as Spurs fans, we're just hoping that at least 2 pan out.
Michael, how do they feel about the draft as a whole? I mean, 3 first-round picks that they did have, and again, like this is the first time that they've had kind of this kind of haul in the draft in a couple years.
Dude, I thought there was a 0% chance of the Spurs keeping all 3 first-rounders because, those are guaranteed contracts. Those are guaranteed roster spots. Spurs fans are used to, draft a guy, send him to the G League, which is in Austin, and or stash them in Europe or whatever the case may be. And I'm telling people, no, when you have 3 first-rounders, you can't do that. There's only 15 spots allowed on an NBA roster. So because of that, these guys are going to be part of the varsity squad, if you will, pretty quickly. I can see Sochan being part of the team when the first game of the season in October. As far as the Spurs fans' reaction to this, I think it's interesting because there's certain players that the Spurs have that were end of their contracts, like Lonnie Walker. The Spurs drafted 2 wing/guards at number 20 and 25 in the draft last night. Malachi Branham from being one of them. And it's one of those things where we're taking a look at it and it's like, oh, the Spurs are moving forward and probably dropping some players along the way. But this is going to be a longer rebuild than what Spurs fans had originally anticipated. We were going from the Duncan years, and the baton had been handed over to Kawhi Leonard, and that guy screwed over this town and this franchise, and the Spurs have been in rebuild mode ever since. But it's exciting for me as a Spurs fan because there's something to be said about falling back in love with the team with new players, and we're young, man. This is a young squad.
What is it, Paul, you and I, Craig, we've said this before. In the NBA, either you have to be really good or about to be pretty good, on the cusp of being good, or bad. You can't be kind of in that 30 to 35. I know that the Spurs have had this win or that win, but would you agree with that, Michael? You got to either be really bad because you don't want to be in the middle.
Yeah, before the draft, the Houston Rockets GM said it best. He says the NBA punishes those in the middle. You either race to the top or you race to the bottom. And I hate for it to be that way, but it kind of is. But we've seen this over the years with teams like Sacramento and Indiana and a variety of different teams that are just kind of like perpetually at 37 to 43 wins, and they're never going to go anywhere because they're not bad at they're too good to not make the playoffs sometimes, or and they're also too good to sometimes miss out on those lottery picks. They're just kind of in the middle. And the Spurs can understand, we talk about how this franchise has built its name in the draft because they picked Tony Parker at 29. They picked Manu Ginobili in the late 50s and DeJounte Murray at 29 and Keldon Johnson at 29. That was like our lucky number there. But the stuff forget that it all started with the fact that the Spurs got Tim Duncan at number 1 way back when, in the late 90s. So, I'm one of the few Spurs fans or guys on the radio over here who's saying, you know what? We need to get as much talent as possible, and that comes from the draft because there are not a lot of free agents, big-name free agents, who want to call San Antonio home, unfortunately.
You mentioned Kawhi Leonard. Obviously, that's a bitter pill. We got some people in the chat room saying, hey, wait a minute. He did win in Toronto. He's now with the Clippers. He had a little bit of rocky time there with them as well. That's one of those that's going to sting for a while, right? Kawhi leaving or not being playing or whatever the story was, because I think both could have handled it better. But is that going to sting for a while?
It always sucks to be ghosted, man. I mean, that's basically what he did to the Spurs. He ghosted us. And the reaction that the Spurs fans and organization had, I think, was valid. But you know what? He's showing his true colors again because he's doing the exact same thing to the Clippers right now. So, from a Spurs fan perspective, you got to look at the long game when it comes to things. And that is a bitter pill. But the Spurs got in that trade for Kawhi Leonard. They got Jakob Poeltl, who's their starting center. They got DeMar DeRozan, who has since been traded away to Chicago. Spurs got that 2025 pick. But the Spurs also got a first-round draft pick in that trade for Kawhi Leonard that became Keldon Johnson, who won a gold medal for Team USA, who averaged 17 points per game for the Spurs last season, knocked down 40% from three. The Spurs actually got something out of that deal, and Keldon Johnson is probably one of the most beloved Spurs of the moment. Sochan will be one of them as well because I think his personality just fits this team. But, thinking about Kawhi Leonard, like thinking about an ex-girlfriend who did you wrong.
Michael, thank you very much. Appreciate you being patient with us, jumping on a little bit later than we thought. Michael Jimenez, Sports Star Radio in San Antonio, on Jeremy Sochan and the Spurs in the draft last night, with Sochan going number 9 overall. All right, we'll keep it here for a second.